Hello everyone. Today we are talking about this book. So this is another one from my mother-in-law's collection. So it's not one I would have ever picked, but nonetheless I figured it might be relatively interesting, so I kept it. Here we are. This is The Psychic in You: Understand and Harness Your Natural Psychic Powers by Jeffrey A. Wands. So this book, I feel like the title is extremely misleading. Understand and Harness Your Natural Psychic Power is really like maybe 1 to 2% of this book. The majority of this book is a memoir. It's him telling his story of how he became a psychic and experiences and clients and things that he's had, but it really doesn't have a lot of like how you can harness and access your psychic abilities. And so if you keep that in mind, it's an interesting read. I figured that out after a few chapters. I was like, okay, we're just gonna roll with this is a memoir. This is his story. We might have little nuggets here and there of advice, but for the most part, no, it's his story. With that in mind, it's not terrible. It's a decent read, kind of interesting to learn about, and so, like, on that front, not a bad read. So the first thing I wanted to talk about for this book is that it makes me kind of question things, because honestly, I struggle with how a lot of the psychic books are written and the way that it's described as experiences, because a lot of me kind of wonders how much is the imagination running wild, how much of it is actual, and how much is a fabrication to sell a book. And maybe that's just the skeptic in me. I have a hard time believing that you're going to see my loved ones constantly, like literally like 3D next to me, but I can't see them or experience them. Only you are the privileged one to be able to do that. And the way that he always described the situations, just, it made me question things, makes me wonder about a lot, and just, I struggle with it, but I don't know if that's the skeptic in me or if that's just how other people experience it and it's just not for me. Because usually when I've had like the paranormal experiences, because this is not necessarily psychic in the way a lot of witches would describe it, this is talking to the dead people. That's it. And so the way that he describes it, the most I've had is like where he talks about like you might have a faint smell or something around. And he really didn't go into a lot of like the general feeling, which is like my category. Hi, I'm all about the feels. And so his is more auditory and visual. And so it's just one of those where you're like, I wish we could like talk about it a little bit more in depth and explanation, not your story. So that was like the first thing that was kind of like, okay, I don't know, but like whatever. Like, I am not a medium, I'm not a psychic, I'm a witch. There's a huge difference. So the first one, and a lot of this comes at the end of the book. The majority of the beginning is like whatever. But the like last little bit, he talks about how there are different levels of an afterlife. And at first I was like, I could maybe get behind this concept. Now the thing about this book that you have to keep in mind, he's definitely Christian. So there's like elements where you're like, okay. Like, it's always God, as in the capital G, and it's always heaven, capital H, and not really much room for other places. Though he doesn't mention hell, which is interesting with the 2 L's, and so it's kind of like, that's a different take if you're gonna be Christian, but not include that one. Cool. So there's like 3 realms, basically, and you have like the heaven realm, or whatever he wants to call it, space, when you die. And that's where God is, and that's like the optimal place to go. That's top tier. Then you have like the middle grade, which is like kind of, he said that it's like where the atheists dwell and they can never move on, because if you're an atheist in life, you're going to be an atheist in death, and you will never get to move on because you're an atheist. What could be problematic about that? Which a little part of that was kind of weird, because he did say earlier in the book of like whatever God you believe in, but then now suddenly it's like the capital G and it's heaven and stuff, so I was like, okay. So I didn't love that part of it, and it kind of leads to the second point that stood out. And then there's like a third realm of the dead where it's like entry level kind of, like you've basically just crossed over, and I think that's where he said like the ghosts kind of dwell, and like that's their level. So like he progressively kept losing me as he explained it more, but I liked the idea of different levels of it. Personally, I don't think I really believe that, but whatever suits your fancy. But one of the things that he talked about in there that leads to my second point is that it depends on the jobs you worked, and certain ones get you a free pass to heaven. And that is like first responders, firefighters, cops, etc. and so on. Those jobs, you get a free pass. You just get to skip it all and go right there because of the job you worked. Now, personally, I've found that there are some that totally deserve that, 100%, but also there are assholes. It can be a very big power trip. We've seen it here in America a lot in the past few years, and I'm sure other places in the world have it too. But the idea that just because you work a job is going to make you a good person and you get a free pass, don't love that. People can be really good, genuine people and deserve that free pass, and they might work at a Wendy's, or they might be a stay-at-home mom. We've talked about that in other books, where you're supposed to go and collect graveyard dirt from like a police officer because they're going to be this like stand-up person. We don't know that. You don't know the person. Just because they worked a job doesn't mean that they're a good person or they're even wanting to do that. You don't know the person. And so it kind of had the same vibes of like, you don't know if they were a good person just because they did a job. There are plenty of doctors who are good at what they do for the actual job aspect and are the worst people outside of their field. When they're in their personal lives, they are the absolute most entitled, rude, just genuinely, you hate to be around them, egotistical narcissists you will run across. But at their job, they're good at it. But it's like, just because they do a job doesn't mean they're going to be this kind and caring, gentle person in their real lives. Like, a job doesn't make you a good person. So the third thing that kind of stood out for me in this book was that throughout the majority of this book, spirits equals dead people. They were people who were alive who died, and the dead are here to help the living. That was the message. They're not going to hurt you, they're here to help you. Which I was already like, I don't know about that. Like, again, not every person who dies magically is going to become a good person. And I don't think we need to. And like, some people are just bad all the way through and it is really complicated. But then at the end of the book, he starts talking about ghosts. And somehow ghosts are different than spirits and other dead people. There's a distinction now that was not really addressed at the beginning, but whatever. And ghosts can be really problematic. They can want to cause chaos, they can be very unpredictable, and they may want to cause you harm. But it's only going to be psychic harm, and I'm like, I don't know about that either. And that spirits are different. They're different dead people. They're the ones that are fine. They're here to help you. And I'm like, why are we, A, just starting to talk about this at the end of the book, and B, what's gonna make them different from a ghost to a spirit? Because they're good? Like, that just doesn't make any logical sense, especially when you're listing them both as just people who've died. So the tips that are scattered throughout this book aren't really that revolutionary. Now, as someone who's a witch, who's practiced witchcraft for over a decade, a lot of these tips are your basic magical hygiene. You need to meditate, you need to know visualization, you need to know how to do like a cleansing shower. Every witch eventually within the first 5 years will probably stumble across that concept. And so like, these ideas aren't really that revolutionary, and so it's just kind of like, this is your tip. And outside of that, his advice is get over it. For example, are you a skeptic about it? And Penczak in his books actively talks about how he was a skeptic and he needed magic to prove itself to him that it actually worked. Meanwhile, this book is like, well, you can't prove it. It won't work that way. You just have to believe. And so basically, if you're a skeptic, get over it. And that goes for a lot of aspects. Are you grieving and you really feel like you need to have closure from your dead loved one, but you are not able to physically like do the things to contact them right now? That's why you're going to this person that you're paying the money for. He will actively tell you no, and that you need to just get over grieving before you contact your dead loved one, which I feel like is like playing God, really. Like, who are you to say that they're not mentally and emotionally prepared for that? Maybe that is the key that they need. They might know themselves more than a stranger. And also they're paying you money, so that also kind of irked me a bit. It'd be different if you just asked a person at random to help you with it, but if I'm paying you money for a specific thing, I'm gonna be a little irked if you don't do the specific thing, you know? Like, you pride yourself, you promote yourself as this person who can talk to the dead and your specific dead, and then they tell you no, that you need to go and finish grieving and get over it before you can talk to your dead one. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Because more often than not, if by the time you've gone through the grieving process, you don't really need a psychic at that point, you've resolved your issues, you've resolved your grieving process, you're good. So that part really was like, really? And then the last one that was a get over it was like, if you're afraid or you have anxiety or fear about this, get over it. Just get over it. Just get over your fear. Just get over your anxiety. It's fine. Once you can do that, then you could be psychic. And I'm like, what kind of advice is that? If somebody is terrified of the dead and the ghosts hurting them, why is your advice to get over it? Just choose to not be anxious. Choose to not be afraid. It's fine. What kind of advice is that? Give practical advice. And like, he has like little magical things sprinkled in, which is like, okay, there's the craft just like sneaking its way into the world's, you know, not in the witchy community. But it was like, you have to like burn sage if you're feeling like your house is a little funky. And I'm like, ooh, look at that. But you also have, there's like more steps than just that. That's probably not gonna fix it. Like, you have to put a little more oomph into it. It might work, but odds are good it's not going to because you don't have like the magical technique behind it. And so it's just like stuff like that I'm like, you tried kind of, but honestly, if you're wanting to develop your psychic abilities more, this is not the book for you. This is a memoir with a couple throw-in things of like, hey, here's some tips, maybe kind of, for you, maybe-ish. And so, yeah, on a whole, it was, I mean, it was fine when I accepted it. It's just a memoir. It was like, whatever, it's kind of interesting, I guess. I personally am not like the biggest into like the psychic field and stuff. I think it'd be interesting to like build more of a connection with the dead, but I'm more interested in my ancestors, not like random dead people. Like, there are so many ghosts and spirits around all of the time. So like, I'm gonna actively choose mine and want to work with them and not necessarily random orbs and things floating around. And he also said that like, if you just take photographs, like eventually, like, I think it was like out of 20, like 8, you're probably gonna find some like orbs and stuff. And I'm like, I feel like that's just not how that works. But I don't know, I haven't tried it. So anyways, like I said, this is from my mother-in-law's collection, so it wasn't a book I ever would have picked up on my own, but I thought it might be interesting, so I kept it. Is it like going on the banished bookshelf? Probably not. I don't think it's that bad of a book. Is it one that's gonna be proudly displayed though? No. It's gonna end up on my kind of meh shelves, where it's like, it's not a bad book, but it's not one I'm gonna reference all the time. So anyways, I would love to hear your thoughts on this one in the comments down below. Huge thank you to my patrons. I'll have their names here on the screen. If you would like to support me and get access to exclusive content, it is patreon.com/nightwillowcrafts. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I post every single day, and until tomorrow, thank you so much for watching, and blessed be.